All right. Hey, good morning and welcome to worship. So, don't lose track of what just happened spiritually right now. We've gathered, and each one of you have an intention. You've come here to draw closer to Spirit, to God, and to each other. And whenever there's a gathering with spiritual intention, there will be an animation here. There will be a type of liveliness and purpose here because you've brought that intention. Welcome to worship. And know that we are a house of prayer for all people. So whoever you are and wherever you are upon life's journey, you are welcome here. Let's worship together.
Same God tomorrow. Help me see the victory you already see. Let my faith be today what it will be tomorrow, when I've seen the victory you already see. No, oh, Jesus, I believe. And in faith I believe it, that what I pray in your name, it's already done. Oh, let your will be done. Oh, we need a miracle. You are the miracle maker, God of the impossible.
So remember, Easter is not just one Sunday. Easter is actually a season of 50 days. So during Eastertide, we are reading scripture passages of the appearances of the risen Christ. Now, we're in the end of Luke here, where remember that on the road to Emmaus, a couple disciples were walking, and a man came up alongside them, and they didn't recognize who the risen Christ was until this happened. Listen. Well, they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us tonight, because it's almost dark and the day is nearly over." So Jesus went to stay with them. When he was at table with them, he took bread, blessed it and broke it, and gave it to them. Right then, their eyes were opened, and they saw who he was. But then he vanished from their sight. They said to each other, "Hey, were not our hearts burning within us when he was talking to us on the road, when he was studying the scriptures with us?" Well, that same hour, they got up and they ran to Jerusalem, and they found the 11 and their companions all gathered together. And they were saying, "The Lord has risen indeed, and he has appeared to Simon." Then they told the other disciples what had just happened to them on the road, and how he had been made known to them in the breaking of the bread.
Michael Pollan, in his book Omnivore's Dilemma, gives us the story of 4 meals. The first meal is what he called the industrialized meal, and we're familiar with this meal, deeply familiar. This is the meal that comes from big agribusiness. This is the meal, well, let's get real. This is like the meal you eat for fast food. High in sugar, lots of corn in it. You go because it's cheap-ish these days and easy. It gives you an initial sense of fullness, right? But we know that we cannot sustain our bodies with a fast food meal. It doesn't really satisfy. That's the first meal. The second meal is the meal that he calls kind of big box organic. We're familiar with big box organic. This is like the whole food type of meal. And we go to Whole Foods and we look at the beautiful produce there and we buy it, and then we let it rot in our refrigerator. We paid $300 for lettuce, and yet we keep on going there. Now that meal is better than the fast food meal, right? But even that meal's not quite there yet. So the third meal is what he calls the pastoral meal. That meal is the meal that you put together by going to a farmer's market, by going to a local rancher and getting them to give you the meat that you might want to consume. This is a meal that requires a preparation, but it also requires intentionality. It's also a bit more expensive than going to the big box supermarket. And often what we're learning is that for some of us, just that extra investment means that we're cooking more of that kind of meal. Now, that meal does indeed provide nourishment. The last meal is a meal that we're not familiar with very, very much, but our ancestors are familiar with it, or were familiar with it. This is the kind of meal that he called the hunter and gatherer meal, which is what our ancient ancestors did. They went into the forest or into the plains, and they hunted meat, and they foraged for whatever was there in terms of nuts and berries and any vegetable type. So that meal takes a lot of time and effort. And he's not recommending that we go out there and become hunter and gatherers again, but he says there's something deeply kind of meaningful about that meal because we recognize it's so face to face to the work that goes for us to be nourished, that we recognize the sacrifices made to get the meals on our table. One of the connections here for us is that if we look at the spectrum of meal sharing, is that if you go to the fast food meal, part of what's happened there is not just that the food is cheap and easy and not great for us, is that it's a kind of food that disconnects us from community. In other words, we're in a hurry, it's lunchtime, we're starving, we go by the drive-thru and we sit in our cars and munch on the calories, and then we go back to life, right? So that meal has that component to it. And actually, the more that you move to the meals that are more nourishing, the more you move towards a kind of meal that requires more people, more community, more gathering. We know about this, don't we? We know about the importance of meals as a place for gathering and the building a community. We know, even those of us who are very busy, we know how good it feels to gather with people around a table with good food and to enjoy that good food to the fullest. We know that there's something about sharing stories in that meal that really kind of strengthens our journey of life in deep ways. We know this as congregations, of course, don't we? So it shouldn't surprise us then, and in today's story, we have these disciples walking to Emmaus, and this stranger comes by and greets them, and they don't know it's Jesus, but it is Jesus, and they're talking about what had just happened. And a lot has happened. Jesus has been, arrested and tried and crucified, and then Jesus has risen again, and they're talking about this together, and the stranger comes alongside them and says, "What's going on?" And they're like, "Who are you? What rock have you been standing under? Haven't you heard?" And Jesus is like, "Nope, tell me." So he begins to tell them, and then when they get to their final destination, these two disciples invite this stranger to come and have a meal with them. And it is there, in that meal, that an encounter with divine life takes place. It is us together in our meal sharing that an encounter with divine life happens. You know that, and I know that. As a matter of fact, you came here to worship today, and I'm glad you're here, and we're coming from different places and life stories and all those kind of things. And yes, I would love to say that you came, for the beautiful music and for maybe the sermon, maybe. But I know you really came for the cookies and coffee. And for the fellowship. There is something powerful about coming together for this fellowship that we have together. At the center of our life together is this gathering around a table where we come and tell stories together. We know that, our bones know that. But we get busy and in a hurry. And we get ourselves into patterns that we know don't satisfy our hungry souls. And there was a time in my own life, in our life as a family, where that became evident to us. We too have been busy with life. But then one day, in the spring of 2020, everything stopped. And now these crazy people who were all going to different places day to day, always in a hurry, always trying to find their way, found themselves once again together, 5 of us, around breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Now many restaurants closed around us, so we couldn't go there, and the restaurants that were providing takeout, the price point was a little high, so we ended up actually cooking all the time together. Breakfast, did I tell you it was breakfast, lunch, and dinner? I'm not going to sentimentalize this whole thing. You went through it too, right? And you know that after a little bit, you kind of get tired of each other a bit, right? It's great to be together, but being together is complicated. You couldn't wait to get back to work. You couldn't wait to send the kids to school. Meal sharing is just like that. And it's good. You also know something else happened during this time. Around May, June of that year, the anxieties all over the country around this pandemic began to, in some ways, reveal something that had been present but wasn't as easily seen. These divisions among our communities began to bubble up. These parts of our life together that were evil and that were marginalizing us of people began to bubble up, and people began to rise up against these things, and we wondered whether we would break from such tensions, and we're still in 2023 still wondering whether we're going to break from such tensions. So something happened in late 2020, early 2021, when folks across the country began to host opportunities for people. How do we come together across difference was the question. And for some of my colleagues, what they thought was that they would begin to do something really edgy and new. They will begin to bring people together who were different from one another and have meals together. And they found that in eating together, something powerful happened. The defenses and the defensiveness began to be brought down, and they began to see that something powerful happened when people ate together. They were able to begin to weave a new way of living life in spite of difference, because of difference, without all the anger and the disappointment and the despair. And as so often happens during moments like that, those of us who are trying to create those opportunities might think that this is something novel. But, anytime that I have in my mind, oh, this must be novel, I go on Google and I figure out that someone else has thought of it. So this week, as I was thinking about these meals that kind of peppered all over the country and began to develop all around, I came across a little treatise that philosopher Immanuel Kant wrote in the late 1700s called Anthropology with a Pragmatic View. Anthropology with a Pragmatic View. Kant wrote this treatise as a series of writings on the nature of humanity. What does it mean to be human? And inviting us into this intellectual conversation. But smack in the middle of that treatise, there is a series of kind of thoughts around dinners and how we should be hosting dinners together, bringing people of different ways of thinking to have an intellectual conversation together. And he had 10 guidelines for such a conversation together. And I'll just share a few of them with you. We don't have time to go through all 10. They're all really fascinating. But you can Google, anthropology with a practical point of view, and you'll find it there. Immanuel Kant. The first thing that drew my attention about his writings was that he says that make sure that you invite a large enough group so there is a lot of different points of view. That sometimes we want to avoid larger groups because we actually are trying to avoid different points of view. So we usually purposely build a community that has different points of view and come together for dinner. The second thing that I found fascinating about that is that he says, whatever happens in the dinner stays in the dinner. Like whatever happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Because he says it's so crucial when you're having these different points of view and these conversations that people feel trusted. They feel a sense of trust building there so that in your talking to each other, you're still working through that intellectual position. You're still thinking about it. You're still shaping it and allowing others to help you shape it, right? So you need trust. And the last thing that got my attention, which surprised me from a philosopher, he said, when the discussion gets really heated, turn to humor. Let the wit of the room take center stage, because then that lowers the anxiety and it allows folks not to take themselves so seriously, because sometimes we take ourselves so seriously and our positions. So then I thought about what we do week to week together. I mean, we gather from different places. And although sometimes our differences are not so obvious, there are differences. Each of us are so unique, right? Where 2 or 3 are gathered together, there are 5 opinions. We are different. And so we gather week to week from our own stories. And we gather together and we come together and we sing songs of praise together and we encounter one another. So we're creating this kind of community. So I began to think, what does it look? So what is it? What can we do together? What kind of meal sharing can we do together? That's so pivotal to our faith, that meal together, that food for the journey. That image that's been with us since the beginning of time in our sacred text about a God who gives us manna in the desert and quail when we need it most. That image of a king who's so hungry that goes into the tent of meeting and eats the bread consecrated for priests. This great story that tells us that a prophet looks up to heaven and God provides a feast of summer fruit for them. We have a story that reminds us that Jesus is constantly feeding people with food, but also eating with the wrong people. This is the God who gathers people together and takes it and blesses it and breaks it. And all of a sudden, the smallest amount is enough for everybody. I mean, we are a people who are deeply rooted in this kind of eating, in this kind of table, in this kind of being together. So what are we missing here? So I was thankful then for singer-songwriter Brandy Carlisle, who became a theologian for me this week. She wrote a song that was published in 2019 called Crowded Table. And she says, I want a house with a crowded table, with a place for everyone around the fire. A crowded table. Now, I like that. I like crowded tables. So I began to think about crowded tables. And so there was this image for me like a crowd. And we love crowds, don't we? I mean, we go to football games, we're in a crowd. But I realized something about church folk. Church folks often don't like crowds too much. Okay, here's the image. The image is of me and Keck during Easter, on Easter Sunday. And the church was packed, right? And guess what we were doing? We were coming down this, right here, the center aisle, and we would look at you and go, hey, excuse me, would you move over just a little bit? We need one more space. And most of you were really gracious. You know, you go, oh, sure, of course. You will look down at your neighbor, you're like, I'm almost on their lap at this point, but okay. A crowded table. Now, a crowded table, it's beautiful. A place for everyone. It's just amazing. But it's also complicated, isn't it? Oh, see, you know, when you have a crowded table, first of all, you know, your personal space gets a little bit tested, right? When you're in a crowded table, too, what begins to happen is all of a sudden someone shows up that doesn't know the manners at table. Because remember, we all think that the manners that we grew up with are the manners to have a table. So someone shows up that doesn't know the rules of table. When you have a crowded table, something else happens. Some people bring food to set table that you don't like. You've never seen such a dish. Have you ever been to a church potluck supper? When the new member shows up with a casserole, it looks a little weird. I know. I'm a pastor. You know who eats the weird new member's casserole? We do. When we have a crowded table, people show up that think differently than we do. When we have a crowded table, some folks show up not at their best. We have no idea, folks, but someone shows up who's truly not having their best day. But now we're here in this crowded table. If we have a crowded table where everyone has a place that means that we are going to have the flexibility in our souls and our hearts to be able to make room for such difference and for such complexities and for such grit. When we have a crowded table, some folks are going to behave in ways that we're not familiar with and we might not even like. When we have a crowded table, some folks might come and sit next to us that we rather repel away because we just cannot get them when we have a crowded table. Our wills are tested. And we begin to wonder whether even we belong there. Oh, but could it be, folks, that that's exactly what we're being called into? First-Plymouthers, a people of the crowded table, not just inside this space, which is wonderful and amazing. I mean, don't I tell you that each week when I greet you? I say, everyone here is welcomed here. Whoever you are, wherever you are on life's journey, you're welcome here. And what do I say to you? Not just tolerated here. Oh no, that's not enough for us. You're not just welcome here. You're celebrated here. You're loved here. You're accepted here. In fact, we are incomplete until you arrive. And once you arrive, we're still incomplete because the next person that should be here is not here yet. We are more whole because you showed up. Now that's a crowded table. So just imagine what it will look like for us to extend such a table into this world that is hungry and in need of acceptance and love. Imagine what it will look like for us to practice crowded tabling wherever we go, so that the world knows, that our neighbors knows, our loved ones know, our annoying coworker knows that there's a place for them. Oh, that God has a place for them, that healing is around the corner, that no matter their life circumstance, this meal we're inviting them into is a meal of healing, wholeness, and new life. So that all who gather here and out there through us knows that no matter their life journey, it will be well with them. It will indeed be well. So, people of God, may we be table setters and meal sharers around a crowded table. Yes, it's a table where you're welcomed. It's a table where all are welcomed. It's crowded, yes, but it's beautiful and amazing. It's a table of healing and wholeness and new life. It's a table where Christ meets us. And we will say, weren't our hearts warmed up when we gathered here? We, being made well by the power of community, by the power of the Spirit, by the power of food, by the power of a God who shows up there.
We've heard a good word, and normally we come forward with candles. Today's going to be a little different. You'll hear a beautiful song that closes our worship. And then when the song ends, you can head out, and the sand receptacles are in the chapel. So you can go into the chapel to light your candle, your prayer for the day. Also, you can take the Eucharist in there, your blessing for the day. Go in peace.
When peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot, thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my my sin. Oh, the bliss of this glorious thought. My sin